have this strong partnership with our state's foremost election expert and defender of democracy, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, and your incredible team. We've been talking just about every day, and I'm thrilled to extend the opportunity to you to speak on these historic election bills. So I'll invite you up if you are ready, and following the remarks from our Secretary of State, I'll go over the agenda for this hearing. Please have at it.
Thank you, Senator Moss. Chairman Moss, it's good to see all of you here today, and really appreciate the work that all of you have done quite deliberatively and collaboratively over the last 6 months to bring us to this point. I'm really excited to testify in support of Senate Bills 367 through 374. These bills will implement the will of the voters, which I think spoke loud and clear last fall in a way that was both overwhelming and inspiring. Last November, Michigan citizens turned out in record numbers, the highest turnout in any midterm election in our state's history, voted in a bipartisan manner to amend our state constitution and expand our election laws and every citizen's voting rights. And since then, I've been working with many of you and your colleagues in the state legislature, as well as clerks around the state, to ensure that the amendments to our state constitution, which are in law, are enabled to be made real for the citizens in our state in a way that maintains the fairness, accuracy, and security that makes our election systems one of the strongest in the nation. The bills that you're discussing today and in the weeks ahead will carry out the will of the voters while providing the flexibility needed to clerks in counties, cities, and townships of all sizes and geographies around the state. They reflect the work of many stakeholders all across our state, the input of individuals in other states who have gone down this road as well, implementing many of these same proposals, and also reflect the needs of voters and the needs of our clerks for flexibility and support at the statewide level. The level of the playing field for every voter, giving them, for example, the right to return their absentee ballot in a secure drop box by mail with prepaid postage, or to use an early voting site where they can feed their ballot directly into a tabulation machine, will create more opportunities for citizens to ensure their voices are heard and to weigh in on critical matters and hold accountable those elected officials in our state. They are and reflect national best practices that have bipartisan support from Kentucky to Minnesota and everywhere else. Michigan voters as well, of course, endorsed these policies by a wide margin last year. I look forward to your discussion and the refinement of the draft legislation today and in the weeks ahead. For example, while I do support the many of the Dropbox changes, we think it's important to ensure video monitoring to enhance the security of all absentee ballot drop boxes, and I'm hopeful that our discussions identify any additional flexibility that may be needed for the very small jurisdictions for whom monitoring may be difficult. We stand ready to support every clerk in every one of our counties and communities to ensure they have all the tools and resources they need to make these voter-mandated policies real, to educate citizens and voters alike about them, to help assure every citizen can be assured of the security of every aspect of our elections process, and also to ensure that our clerks from Houghton to Hillsdale, from Grand Rapids to Detroit, have the support they need to ensure a smooth election process in every election in our state. On that note, I'm also hopeful that these bills, including the bills surrounding the early voting procedures, are enacted as quickly as possible, because as you will hear from election administrators around our state, we need and are already preparing for the presidential primary election in February, and the more clarity and support from all of you, the sooner is the better. Finally, by working together in a bipartisan manner, we have ensured that a lot of these policies reflect the needs not just of our citizens and clerks, but reflect what is best for our state. And I really am hopeful that the forthcoming discussion will similarly continue in a way that highlights not just best practices, but is grounded in data and facts, and taking a solution-oriented approach to fulfilling the will of the voters. So on that note, thanks for having me here today.
We appreciate your partnership and your expertise that you lent during the bill drafting process. I will roll into the first bill on the agenda, and I know that your staff will remain here and give us their feedback as we talk about each bill in successive order. So heading into our agenda now, we plan to take testimony on as many of the 8 bills on today's agenda as we have time. We have the room till 5 p.m., and so if we are not able to cover everything until then, we're going to plan to meet again tomorrow morning at 8:30, not in this room, in room 1100 here in the Binsfield office building. So we'll go through each bill numerically, allowing first the bill sponsor to provide a summary of his or her bill, followed by testimony from those who helped in the drafting process that can help committee members answer some questions. And then at the end of this, we have others that wish to speak. Once we get through all the bills, we will allow those who submitted cards to provide their testimony as well. To manage our time in committee, I kind of am asking for a rough 4 minutes per testimony, and if we get closer to the end of our allotted time, we may have to shorten that. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with our lead bill, which is the early voting bill.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity and to speak here today. And I also do want to take just a moment of privilege and thank you, Chairman Moss, for really deliberately and diligently bringing us all together throughout the last 6 months to bring us to this moment today. Your leadership has been an example of exactly what is needed to ensure our election policies are truly data-driven, rooted in best practices, and reflect bipartisan support. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we will start off with the first bill, which is my bill, Senate Bill 367. Voters deserve more choices to vote in person than to attempt to squeeze in the time during the workday on a Tuesday to go to a polling site and potentially face long lines of other voters trying to do the same. So to spread out that saturation of people at the polls, we are providing guidance to our 83 county clerks and 1,500 municipal clerks to conduct Proposal 2's 9 consecutive days of early voting for statewide elections, beginning on the second Saturday before the election and ending on the Sunday before the election for at least 8 hours a day. We recognize that we are a diverse state with diverse communities requiring flexible choices. Some of us have full-time clerks with full-time staff in brick-and-mortar offices, and smaller and rural communities, however, may only have 1 voting precinct and a part-time clerk with part-time staff who work from home. To ease the burden on clerks and their staff and their resources, this bill does not require your election polling location or every election day polling location to be open during the 9 days of early voting. Instead, the bill requires clerks to establish early voting plans that allows communities to select the options that meet their specific needs. So a community has choices. It may choose to host its own single municipality early voting site or sites within its municipal boundaries. It may also partner with another municipality in a joint early voting site, or it may contract with the county to conduct its early voting. Clerks must consider several factors when establishing their early voting plans, such as expected turnout, accessibility, population density, and more. This bill provides for the process to select early voting sites, and the voter will be notified where that site is in their community or their county. The tabulators for early voting will be programmed for the early voting site that they are in. The precinct cannot be programmed on more than 1 tabulator at an early voting site, and the early voting poll book associated with that tabulator may only have a voter list associated with the precinct or precincts on that tabulator. And these will not be the same tabulators used on election day. The Secretary of State in the bill will have oversight of early voting, including acquiring and approving secure and efficient technology for the early voting poll book, which must be updated before early voting starts each day to reflect new registered voters, absent voter ballots received, and ballots cast at early voting sites since the last update. Clerks must take all necessary steps to secure election equipment and materials at the end of each day of early voting in accordance and guidance from the Secretary of State. We hold the security of your vote sacred during the 9 days of early voting. And Senator McBroom's bill, Senate Bill 368, outlines the penalties for generating or reporting early voting results before 8 p.m. on Election Day. So with that, I will field it over to Senator McBroom, who has long been working in this early voting space to provide additional comments on Senate Bills 367 and 368.
Thank you, Chairman Moss. Well, the summary of my bill is fairly much like you said. So it's the sentencing guidelines. I'll simply add to your earlier comments that the issue of early voting was something that I began work on during my last term, and something I felt strongly was an important step for us to take, especially in light of the incredible amount of absentee voting that was taking place. And I think that this is a more secure and simpler and more efficient way to allow people to have flexibility to vote ahead of Tuesday. And so I've worked with many of the clerks who are here in the room today, and I'm glad to see us getting to this step. I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that the language around securing the technology and what the technology must do or must not do, how ballots are handled, the security surrounding them, I think are all areas that we can all work together to make sure meet the ends that we are all saying that we want to see met. So thank you for allowing me to be part of the work on this, because I put a lot of time into it beforehand. So I know you used quite a bit of my draft from last term in putting this together, and I appreciate that that work hasn't gone to waste. Thank you.
And especially, I'm coming from a more densely populated part of the state, and you're coming from a more rural part of the state, and we have to implement these 9 days of early voting. We have to make it work for your district and my district, which is exactly why we've provided options on the menu that work for communities in both of our districts. Yeah, Senator.
And if I might add one last thing, is a lot of the work that went into this, I certainly have to thank the Clerks Association, both the municipal and the counties, and also to other states. We did a lot of investigation as to what other states are doing, how they're implementing their early voting. I think we've avoided some of the pitfalls that some of them are doing, where they have too many days. It stretches out far too long. But we can see how a state like Florida, I think, is such a great example, where less than 20 years ago, they were the laughing stock of the country. And everybody sat around on election night and the next day and the day after waiting for Florida, not knowing when it was coming in. And now on election night, it's like, whoa, Florida's in already? How'd that happen? Well, it's because they did a lot of these reforms that we're working on here. And I think we can move Michigan into that kind of box too, where on election night, it's not surprising when our results are in and we're waiting for somebody else to get it done. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think it's moving in a good direction. Thank you.
You're exactly right. So I can take questions from members, but we will have folks who were very involved come up and testify on each of the successive bills. Vice Chair Johnson, if you have questions, and if they're technical in nature or specifically reserved for clerks, the clerks will be testifying on each successive bill.
Probably for the authors of the bill.
Sure.
The first question I have is on Bill 367.
Yeah.
I have three basic questions. On page 14, section 720C, it says the Secretary of State shall supervise the implementation of early voting. I believe that the terminology in the past laws are administer because the local clerks conduct. And I was wondering why that was changed.
We certainly can field that to the Secretary of State or to the ballot proposal drafters over the specific language choice on that word. And they will come up to testify.
Okay, and then just two more quick questions. On the rest of that page, 14 at the bottom. It has many different things, but it doesn't really have what we have had in the past, which I don't believe goes against the constitutional amendment, is that usually the rules go through JCAR, so the public has an opportunity to make comments. So I would hope that we could look at that, since that is something I think is important, is allowing public review and hearing their comments. And then the last thing is on section 4, 720E5, it says it allows up to 29 days of early voting in person. I believe the Constitution limits it to 9. Is there some reason that that's there?
The language says at least 9 in the ballot proposal.
So there's been a decision to go from 9 to 29 days?
And we can have the clerks talk about that, but we do not have the capability with the constraints of the constitutional proposal to cap it at 9.
Okay, maybe you can show me after the meeting.
Sure.
Where it stops it from being 9.
Sure.
Because 9 is, for many communities, a hardship. 29, they just simply don't have the staff to do it.
They are not required to go above 9. So if a community can only facilitate 9 days of early voting, that community does not have to go further than 9. And communities that so choose have the capabilities to do so, have the ability to go above that. So a community is not required to go beyond 9 days.
All right, so I just need to clarify something. One community, say Community A, could have 9 days, and Community B could have 29 days. So there's not equal access to all communities under that plan.
But all communities will have 9 days.
But if one has 9 and one has 29, the one with 29 has far more access than the one with 9. So I would like to look into that further, because I don't believe that that is equal access.
I hear your concerns. This is just the constraints of the language as passed by 60% of the voters that says at least 9 or at minimum 9. This language in the law reflects what's in the Constitution now.
Okay, and because you made that comment, I just have to make one. We know that the ads cost millions of dollars for this proposition, and they were full of deceits and lies. And one of them was, and they played it on mainstream over and over.
I don't want to relitigate the campaign because the ballot proposal passed.
Right, but
and we're here charged with implementing the bills associated with the language that is now in the Constitution.
And I agree, but when you say, and others say, 60% of the people wanted, 80% of them did not. It was based on lies. You do not have to show photo ID to vote, and 80% of the public, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, and minorities all support that. Those were passed based on lies and deceptions. Yes, they're the law, and I'll do what the law is. But when people say and brag about that, make sure you add in, we did it with bad information on millions of dollars on primetime TV.
We will go right into those who helped to kind of bring this constitutional amendment into the bill drafts that we have today. We'll start off with Erica Pearsman from Promote the Vote. You can keep your comments tailored around 4 minutes so we can keep the flow, and I know we'll be seeing you a lot throughout this hearing as well. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Moss and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bills 367 and 368 today. And Promote the Vote would also like to thank you, Chairman Moss, for the excellent work that you and your staff did to ensure that the language in these bills and all of the bills that will be considered today were thoroughly reviewed by clerks and the Department of State and the Bureau of Elections and other stakeholders during the drafting process. We are really grateful for the time and care that was taken to get it right. So thank you so much for that. As you said, these bills implement a critical element of the constitutional amendment that gave every registered voter the right to vote early in person in all statewide and federal elections at what's called an early voting site. And the Constitution sets out the basic framework. It must be for at least 9 consecutive days, for at least 8 hours a day, and It also says that early voting sites can be open for additional days and hours beyond the minimum, and municipalities can also offer early voting for non-statewide and federal elections if they so choose. And the Constitution authorizes municipalities to enter into agreements, as you said, with other municipalities in their county or with their county clerk to conduct early voting. So there's a lot of detail in these bills, and I'm going to highlight just a few areas. The bill provides clarity regarding the 3 different options that municipalities have to conduct early voting. So every municipality has to offer early voting for the minimum number of days and hours, but it is not a one-size-fits-all proposition for Michigan because that would not have worked for Michigan. Rather, each municipality has the flexibility to choose how they will conduct early voting. So they can either do it entirely on their own, as they do for Election Day, or they can collaborate with other municipalities in the county or with their county clerk to do early voting if the county clerk is willing. If two or more municipalities in the same county decide to collaborate with each other, they will enter into what's called a municipal agreement to jointly offer early voting at a shared site or sites. And similarly, if a county clerk says, yes, I'm going to do early voting, then they'll enter into a county agreement with one or more municipalities to conduct early voting for them with the assistance of the local clerks at a shared site or sites. And this collaboration is going to allow for economies of scale. Instead of each municipality having to hire their own poll workers and provide their own tabulators and supervise early voting for 9 days, the municipalities or the municipalities and the county clerk would share poll workers and tabulators and supervisory duties, saving the municipality money and making administration easier for the local clerks. But crucially, each municipality gets to decide which version of this they want to do for conducting early voting, so they can decide what is best for the municipality and for their voters. And what the bill does is provide a roadmap for these different options. It details how administering early voting as a standalone jurisdiction would work and what needs to be in the municipal agreements and the county agreements for those who choose to have them. And it also directs, as you mentioned, Senator, how tabulators and early voting poll books must be configured at the early voting sites to enable balancing of the number of voters who are shown in the poll book as having voted with the number of ballots that are shown on the tabulator at the end of each day. And there's different options for that too, depending on how early voting is being conducted. And then there are a number of general provisions that apply to all methods of conducting early voting. The bill directs the Secretary of State to take a number of actions to support early voting, such as developing, acquiring, or approving the technology that's needed, creating templates for the different agreements and for early voting plans, and providing resources and guidance for ensuring the security of early voting. The bill also lays out how early voting sites are to be closed and the ballots sealed in ballot containers and the equipment secured at the end of each day of early voting. And there's a procedure in the bill for early votes to be canvassed by election inspectors after the close of polls on Election Day, which is similar to how this is done at polling places on Election Day. So another thing that the bill does is expand polling place options, recognizing that clerks are even now having a great deal of difficulty finding enough suitable polling locations for Election Day, and recognizing also that very few of those locations that they use now are going to be available for at least 9 days of early voting. The bill expands the types of locations that can be used for polling places and early voting sites. It provides that a publicly owned or a controlled building, such as a municipal building or a school, must be used unless it is not possible or convenient to do so, and that was language that was previously in the law. But it doesn't limit the alternate sites that can be chosen in the way that the current law does, with one exception that is similar to the current law, and that is a building that is owned or leased by an elected official, a candidate, or a person who's regulated under the Michigan Campaign Finance Act cannot be used. And we spent a great deal of time talking about, well, what happens if one of those folks leases part of a building? Well, if that's the case, then that part of the building leased by the candidate or the elected official can't be within 100 feet of the entrance to the early voting site. And that, of course, mirrors current law prohibiting campaigning within 100 feet of a polling place. And I think this expansion of polling places is going to be really important for our clerks to be able to implement early voting. There's also provisions in the bill that mandate planning because, you know, this is complicated and it's not going to happen without some advanced planning. So for 2024, which is the first year when early voting is required statewide and when the first statewide election is the presidential primary, this is how it will work. About 5 months before the presidential primary, county clerks will need to let their municipalities know if they intend to offer a county agreement, and the municipalities need to let the county clerk know whether they intend to go it alone or collaborate. And then about 4 months before the presidential primary, the municipal agreements and the county agreements actually get signed, and detailed early voting plans have to be submitted to the county clerk. And an outline of the content of those agreements and the early voting plans is set out in the bill. And then about 3.5 months before the presidential primary, county clerks need to submit county-wide early voting plans to the Secretary of State, which would include information about the location, dates, and hours for early voting that will be posted on the Secretary of State's website. And it's true, they will not be uniform throughout the state because the clerks are granted discretion on how many days, and although it has to be 9 hours a day, it doesn't say which hours those have to be. So the information will eventually make its way to the Secretary of State's website so that voters can access that information. And one of the things that I think is important in the bill is that the county clerks are responsible for ensuring that every voter in their county will be provided at least one site for early voting. Or they will have to notify the Secretary of State if a municipality has not submitted a plan so that they're unable to verify that that will be the case. And again, an outline of that countywide plan is in the bill. So there will be a lot of planning. It's already started, even in the absence of this legislation. And with the legislation, I think it will make it easier for clerks to go down that road. And again, you know, as Senator McBroom mentioned, clearly we cannot have early voting results generated or reported until after 8 p.m. on Election Day, just as Election Day results currently cannot be generated or reported until the polls close. And so we have the provision in the bill that states that an individual who intentionally discloses a result before 8 p.m. on Election Day is guilty of a felony, and then the sentencing guideline is in the companion bill. So Promote the Vote strongly supports the passage of these bills, and you know, the voters of Michigan granted themselves the right to vote early, and these bills implement that great new right. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks. I gave latitude on time because this was one of the more laborious parts of,
Yes.
of the package here. Are there any questions for committee members, knowing that clerks and Secretary of State are going to come up as well? All right. Excellent. Thank you very much. So with that, I will call up our representatives from the Michigan Association of Municipal Clerks, Clerk Mary Clark and Clerk Chris Swope. You are not on. You got to push the button at the base. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, very good. All right, thank you very much for this opportunity and for taking up these important bills. As has already been discussed, the voters passed Proposal 2 of 22, and now as a clerk of many years, I am left not knowing how to run elections anymore to some degree, because while it did contain very important items, some of them were not fleshed out to the level that we need to be able to implement them. When I first ran for city clerk, I made a commitment to my voters to do everything I could to make voting easier, which I have done for going on 2 decades. And one of the promises that I have been making to my voters is to do everything that I can to make sure that our elections are safe, secure, and accurate. I do want to take a moment on this bill and say that this early voting is very important to the voters of Michigan. The ability to take your own ballot and put it into a tabulator and not be restricted to doing that on the specific election day is key. I have had voters who thought, because of news coverage is national, that they already had this right and they would come to my office to vote, and we would only be able to offer them an absentee ballot that they could mark and would be processed later by my absent voter team. So the ability for folks to be able to do this, put their own ballot in and do it at their own convenience is essential, and I appreciate the work that's been done. I think most of the details that are in this bill have already been covered, so I won't dive in too much to that. But I do want to address Senator Johnson's very apt question regarding the number of days of early voting. And I would point out that the Constitution does provide for 9 consecutive days, at least 8 hours each day. And then quoting from the constitutional language, it says, "and may be open for additional days and hours beyond what is required herein at the discretion of the election official authorized to issue ballots in the jurisdiction conducting the election." So I think that's very clearly provides local jurisdictions the ability to expand that, and that is right directly in the Constitution. Additionally, in terms of the equity or equality of that, every voter still does have the right to vote by mail for the 40 days before the election, during, and in person at the clerk's office during regular business hours, although they wouldn't be able to necessarily put it into a tabulator if that clerk is not doing the expansion, as well as the right to, if they want to, put it into the tabulator during the 13 hours on election day. And I would point out that there is a difference between equality and equity. I am a jurisdiction of close to 90,000 registered voters, and I expect 18,000 people in a large election to want to vote, to early vote. So restricting my community to 9 days, where that might create lines, does not create equity for different sized communities that might be able to accommodate their voters who would want to vote early during the 9 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all of the opportunity as municipal clerks that we have been granted in this committee process, in the work groups, to be a voice at the table and to really problem solve together. I was fortunate enough to be one of the municipal clerks that worked with Senator McBroom last session, and we spent a lot of hours and a lot of words discussing how early voting could look and how it could function in Michigan. And I am very appreciative of Senator Moss picking that up and moving that work and expanding on it. So it's just all good. I'm so excited about all of it. Michigan, as I testified earlier in the year, about our priorities. Michigan is unique in a state in terms of voting in the United States. We have local control, and that makes us very different than the vast, vast majority of states. We have been able to wrap into this work that we have done, that uniqueness that we are of having so many local controls, so many municipalities conducting elections. And as Promote the Vote testified, there are options, and those options are very important to the wide variety of clerks that we have in jurisdictions that we have in Michigan. So as the Clerks Association, we're very appreciative of that recognition that we are different. There isn't a one-size-fits-all. I also am very thankful for the precinct location expansion. Delta Township, which I am the clerk of for a few months shy of 12 years, I used 10 churches for our 16 precincts, and no church is going to give me their facility for 10 days for early voting, or 9 days, or however, the minimum. And I appreciate the fact that we can look for options within the township now. We are eager, obviously, for this whole new world to be able to be piloted this fall. Many cities in our state have fall elections in November. It would be really, really beneficial if we can pilot this in those jurisdictions that are having a November election, whether it's a county with a special or a school election or a city. Being able to pilot and make sure that we did dot the i's and cross the t's correctly is really, really important. I'm a medium-sized jurisdiction. I have roughly 27,500 registered voters. To start with, am doing only the 9 days of early voting to give me, but I know that my numbers, I can manage those. I've done the math on them, what my biggest elections were, how many sites that there will be. I will be working in partnership with a neighboring township who is smaller that does not want to do their own early voting site. They want to do it in partnership and have Delta be the lead. So I'm very fortunate, and I know a lot of clerks that counties have started having conversations about what early voting can look like in their individual communities, and being able to carry a lot of this stuff forward of thought and ideas and talking about it, we were able to bring them back to the table during this process. So it's been really a growth opportunity for all of us, and everybody has had a voice at the table, and we are very appreciative of that. So I thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go with Vice Chair Johnson for a question.
Thank you. We have two quick ones. One is, when I read this, does it say that that a tabulator would be able to count ballots from multiple communities? And if that's the case, who's going to have custody of it to ensure that it's secured?
Each agreement requires there to be identified one lead jurisdictions, for lack of a better word. I don't know exactly the word that we used in it, but that's the concept. In my example that I gave, Delta will be the lead along with Windsor Township. We will retain custody. The site will be within the boundaries of Delta Township. And all of the new equipment that the state was able to provide to jurisdictions in the 2017-2018 election range have the ability to be programmed for multiple jurisdictions. We do it now already with school elections, for example. So it works now. That was the nice thing about moving forward on this. While they're different, having school elections combined, it's the same overall concept, and we were able to build from that.
Another quick one. We expanded election poll books, so when the person came in to vote, their driver's license would be slid through, similar to a charge card used to be.
Correct.
And that ensured integrity in so many ways.
Absolutely.
Will the electronic poll books be used under this system?
Yes. It's my understanding you will either have an electronic poll book, or you could possibly have I'm blanking on the word, but a satellite office, you could have QVF actually available in that and work from QVF if your
So-
early voting site is a satellite office.
I think we put like a 10,000 limit on if you had more than 6 or 10,000, that you would have to use the electronic poll book because it does ensure so much integrity. So it would be optional under this plan rather than required?
Well, you would have to use one or the other, yes.
So it would be optional to use the electronic poll book?
I'm hoping that when it's all said and done, that I would be able to use QVF. But if not, yes, it would be an electronic poll book.
Thank you.
Go to Senator McMorrow.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being here, and thank you for the involvement in this process. I know even when we made a lot of the changes to absentee voting, I conducted a virtual town hall with a Republican clerk and a Democratic clerk, and we were flooded with questions. So I really appreciate your involvement in making these bills as strong as they can be. I was wondering if you could touch on some of the language in the bills regarding notification. How are voters going to find out where their location is and when it's available? Because I think a lot of residents are excited about this change, but I think as we saw the last time we made significant changes, a lot of questions. They want to know where to go.
And I think I would say that that's one that we still need to perhaps put some finishing touches on. The bill envisions individual separate notices, which I think is burdensome. Some of us envision that we may have a different number of locations based on the type of election, whether it's a city election, a presidential election, or an August primary. So I definitely believe it should be an MVIC, which is how the weekend hours before Election Day is currently notified. I know most of us do everything we can to put the word out on through the media, social media. We have many email addresses of voters, so we are looking at different ways that we can make sure and communicate that. And this is one that has a little bit of potential to be confusing since some communities will be teaming up, so it's not necessarily within your own community, but that is one that we are focused on.
Yes, MVIC will play a critical role in this. That's where we drive and direct our voters now to know where their precinct is. We always advertise that. It's on our website, it's in our social media. We in Delta start putting it out days before to direct people to MVIC if they have any questions, or, you know, obviously to call the clerk's office. But in the absence of that, there's a solid database with the Secretary of State's office.
Any other questions? And that is accounted for in the language of the bill. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now bring up our representatives from the Association of County Clerks, Clerk Vanessa Guerra and Kyle Bostwick. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. My name is Vanessa Guerra, and I serve as a Saginaw County Clerk. I want to first make mention that I am here in my individual capacity as a county clerk. The Clerks Association has not taken a formal position on the bills yet, but we are meeting on Monday, and so you should have a position that reflects, or a card reflecting our position at the next committee meeting. Before I jump into my remarks for today, I do just want to thank Senator Moss and his staff, and probably especially the Legislative Service Bureau, for the countless hours and days and really months that they put into revising this draft. I think, first and foremost, our goal was to carry out the wishes of the people as described in the constitutional amendment, but also to craft the implementing language in a way that works in practicality, right? So you can read the Constitution all day long and what the language says, but what does that actually look like? It was essential that we had county clerks there, local clerks, and election administrators. So our goal today was just to sort of provide you what this would look like for at the county level. And so with this legislation, once implemented, our plan is that we will have one county voting center. So because elections never end, and frankly, we've been implementing the constitutional amendment since the end of last year, we began very early this year working with our local clerks to assess what they would want, how they want to carry out this new amendment. And so we sent out a survey in March of this year asking them if they envision collaborating with the county, collaborating with each other, or going it alone. And so we were fortunate that our 30 local municipalities, I don't know if we're fortunate, but all decided that the county would be the one that would carry the water and implement 9 days of early voting. And so in Saginaw County, our plan is that we would have one county voting center. It would be located near our courthouse, which is at the center of our county, right between our two largest communities. We would have 4 tabulators. 2 of those tabulators would be assigned to our 2 largest municipalities, which is Saginaw Township and the city of Saginaw. And then the other 2 would split the remaining municipalities 50-50 on each tabulator. We would have probably around 7 election workers, and we would also have our local clerks involved in this as well, asking them each to kind of take one of those days to come and work as a supervisor for the vote center, because our local clerks and our county clerk staff are sort of those elevated election officials. They're the ones who know how to and have access to QVF if necessary, and really can deal with any more of the complicated in-person voting experiences that sometimes arise on election day. And so the reason that we need this legislation to pass so quickly is because, as you'll see in the legislation, there are many requirements, which include meeting with the locals to get resolutions passed at all of the local municipalities. So that means we'll be going before 30 local units of government, drafting a resolution, asking them to pass it so that we can all get on board together. Most importantly, probably, we have to secure a location. We have ideas in mind, but as was mentioned earlier, security is something that we want to focus on, and so we want to make sure we find a location that is accessible, that is not leased or owned by a political candidate or someone with a PAC or anything like that, and also has space and the security to lock away our tabulators at the end of the day for those 9 days, and has cameras and all those sorts of things. And so that takes a lot of work to find a location. We're a decent-sized county, but we still don't have a ton of space to choose from, and we'll also have to purchase equipment before next year. And so we'll need additional tabulators, we'll need additional laptops. Our locals will have to buy additional supplies for applications to vote and all those normal things that they buy. And additionally, with this legislation, we'll also have to, it'll determine how many ballots the county decides to get printed. And so all of that takes a lot of time. And so we have started now but we need this framework, this legislation, so that we can take that to our locals to make sure that they're on board and start educating the voters. And I had one other thing I want to mention to Senator McMorrow's point. Voter education is also encompassed in the plans that we have to submit to the Secretary of State. So there's actually a communication strategy that has to be incorporated into your plan about how you're going to educate voters on these hours and days and locations. So I think that covers everything that I wanted to cover.
Thank you. And I want to emphasize, too, voter education is just going to be incredibly important throughout all of this.
Right.
This is I've been quoted as saying a generational change, a whole new option for folks. And so that's why we really want to get these bills implemented as soon as possible so that voters know well ahead of the next statewide election where this is required, how the system works. So I think each clerk and the associations are going to have to go back and really convene to make sure that all of this information is available to the voter. We do have in the law or in the bill draft requirements for this information to be sent out, but we know we're going to have to go well above and beyond that. Right. We have a question from Senator Camilleri.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thinking about staffing as an issue in every sector. I know that we saw some significant challenges with election workers in the last election. What do you think this will do for you and your department, as well as for local clerks, when finding additional staff? Will make it harder? Will make it easier if there's more stability with a potential job? Because it's a longer period of time. How would that work? And then my second question is around the speed of election results. Will this make it quicker, do you think, that we would receive results? Or what is your prediction on how that process will play out?
Yeah, as for staffing, so that is part of why the timing is of the essence with this legislation, because at the county level, I kind of describe it, prior to this legislation, the counties were very involved at the beginning and the end of elections, and now we're smack dab in the middle. And so this legislation has entirely changed the lives of every county and local clerk. It's the largest, most significant piece of election law change that we've seen in our history. And so because of that, we currently have myself that works in elections, we have our election director, and then we have a part-time person. But now we're going to be operating 9 days for 30 municipalities for 157,000 registered voters in Saginaw County. So we need more staff. But to go along with that, it's difficult to go before our Board of County Commission or even our locals to go before their full boards to ask for funding for more staff for something that isn't law yet. And so we have had initial conversations with our Board of Commissioners explaining that we will need more staff, and they are generally understanding and supportive, but until something's signed into law, they don't necessarily feel like they have to do anything just yet. So we will need more staff. And I think that in general, so long as funding, and I know that there's been conversations around funding for elections in the budget, if that does follow through, it will be easier for us to do that, so long as we have, again, the law to refer to that shows that we need more staff.
To answer the question about election results, I would anticipate, since more people will be voting early and we'll be tabulating those ballots in advance, that we'll be able to generate those election results on election night after the polls close in a quicker process. We'll have statewide election results faster.
Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being a county clerk is so much different than being a local clerk,
Yes.
right? You will need more staff because really your job is to aggregate those amounts from each city and township rather than conduct. And it's a far different animal. So I was wondering if you had a plan or if there's one that could be put together currently or as of last month on the qualified voter file. If you compare it against the census, we have 104.5% of the people registered to vote. We used to have a 30-day period by the time you registered and you could vote because the person was checked out to make sure that they were a qualified voter. Now, as you know, we have same-day registration, but we have no real-time system to check. And now, despite the ad saying that you would have to show photo ID, you do not. So how do you guard against somebody voting multiple times, or how do you stop that 4.5% that's over 100% from voting? Or is this something that still needs to be worked out?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this a lot. So we have a diverse group of, Saginaw County is very diverse. So I think a lot of times people think of the city of Saginaw, but we have several larger rural communities that are more conservative. And so our county is very mixed, 50-50, and we have these conversations all the time. But what comes out of it is that we do run fair and safe, secure elections already. I mean, we ran them under you, we ran them under Jocelyn Benson, and so we have the checks and balances that are in place that prevent this from happening already. And, you know, earlier we were talking about if I wanted to vote in Saginaw County and then run over to Midland County, there were so many laws that I would have to break before that could even happen that it would be nearly impossible to do, but if I did achieve it, I would be prosecuted because we have the laws in place that would ensure that I would be prosecuted for that. And so, you know, I think when we were crafting this legislation, we had all of those, we certainly had all of the conspiracies that we heard in 2020 in mind as we drafted it, and wanted to ensure that we followed the same structure that it currently exists for our in-person election day precincts to apply to our early nine-day early voting precincts as well, so that we are following all the same laws that we have in place to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Well, I know of nothing in the system systemically, other than somebody who's breaking the law, which some people are not above that.
Sure.
Especially when it's a very spirited election.
Right.
We saw people that did things that they shouldn't have on both sides of the aisle in, a previous election, substantial things. And so catching them afterwards doesn't negate what damage that they've done. So I'm not sure what is in there systemically that would stop somebody from voting in multiple places.
Yeah, I think that if the thought is that we're going to have a system that entirely prohibits any type of fraud, that would be impossible. But if we create systems that are so prohibitive that they actually make it harder for voters to vote, I think that would be un-American, right? So our democracy requires that we give access to our citizens to vote and participate in our democracy. And if we create systems that make it harder, that I think that'd be antithetical into what it is our job is, to uphold the Constitution and ensure they have access to safe and secure elections.
We'll have a little difference on that one, because I think people are disenfranchised when somebody does do something that's illegal. And we have nothing systemically, and we do have 104.5% of the eligible electorate registered to vote in Michigan. I think with all these new changes, we need to put something in place. And I do believe in safe and secure elections. That was the name of a package I got through years ago. So we agree on that. It's just how are we going to get there? Because right now it's a gaping hole in our system, and there are people that will cheat. And as long as we have a system that allows it, it will happen. But we can, I think, put things in place that will stop the cheating that goes on or that people are planning under these new rules without having any negative effect on people voting. So I look forward to working with you.
I'll also chime in and make note that the person has to prove residency, and if they register to vote within the last 2 weeks before an election, they're issued a challenge ballot. And as that ballot is then later examined and it was found out that they committed fraud or voted multiple times, that person is going to be referred to authorities for prosecution. So the system is already in place. If somebody had nefarious intentions, wanted to vote multiple times, because the ballot that they'd be issued would already be open for examination later on.
It doesn't work exactly that way, but there were over 20,000 people that didn't show with their ID that did register just in the last 2 weeks in the last election. So we don't have a system, and we have no idea if somebody voted in Toledo or if they used a different name and voted in different communities in Michigan without having a photo ID. So there are some places that we just need to make sure that we mend the holes in the system so everyone can vote and feel confident. No one will be disenfranchised. Thank you.
We don't have any other further questions from committee members, so we appreciate your testimony. And then we will go right into the Secretary of State's office with Aaron Shore. And I don't know if Agogo Debier is still here. Oh, we have you, Aaron. So
excellent. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. As others have said, I really want to commend the process that got us to the point of the introduction of these bills. I think all of the stakeholders would say that they're not perfect. We all had to give something of what we wanted, and so sometimes that represents the best efforts because we've learned from each other and from the diverse viewpoints that we have in our diverse state. I feel like several of the other speakers have mentioned some of the points that I was going to highlight, particularly the need for flexibility in early voting and also the challenge that will represent. The Department of State works very hard to provide information to voters about what their rights are, what their options are, where they can go, and that will vary somewhat across the state. We certainly will lean heavily on the Voter Information Center and on other methods that are maybe more personalized than what we have used in the past just for the election day information, although that will certainly get out to residents as well. And I want to reiterate the concerns that Clerk Guerra mentioned about the need for funding. I know there have been excellent conversations going on with your colleagues and your counterparts in the House, as well as the administration. Hopefully I'm not being gavelled out already. Proposal 2 is very clear and explicit that the state needs to fund the cost of drop boxes as well as return postage, but we all know that our clerks aren't just sitting on piles of extra money to implement 9 or more days of early voting, and so we appreciate those conversations about funding that because elections are critical and we need to make sure that they run securely across our state regardless of what resources a local community has available. I wanted to speak quickly to a couple of the questions that Senator Johnson had raised earlier. Section 21 of the Michigan election law already grants the Secretary of State supervisory control over local election officials and makes her the chief election officer, and so that's where we got that term supervise that was used on page 14. And in terms of going through the JCAR process to promulgate rules, we know that this needs to be in place no later than the presidential primary next year. And as you heard clerks say, they would love to have the chance to pilot this if they have 2023 elections. And unfortunately, our administrative rules promulgation process just takes longer than that. So we would be loath to go through that because it would not give us a chance to provide this guidance to clerks in a timely manner. With that, I think that's everything that I have prepared, and I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, any questions? All right, you said it all.
All right, thank you.
All right, we're going to roll forward to the next bill, and you're going to kind of sense a routine here of having the opportunity to answer the same stakeholders, having them have the opportunity to answer your questions. This next bill is Senate Bill 369, which fulfills the permanent mail ballot list requirement in Proposal 2. This bill is sponsored by Senator Sam Singh, who wishes he could have been here, but is otherwise tied up. And it defines a permanent mail ballot voter as a voter who signed an application to receive an absentee voter ballot by mail for all future elections and whose application was verified. You will fill out the form, you will select, and you will be on a permanent mail ballot voter list and receive that for each successive election. The bill would require that the voter registration card indicate the address that future absent voter ballots will be mailed to the permanent mail ballot voter, and it also gives guidelines on how a voter would no longer be considered a permanent mail ballot voter. It's the same alignment as how somebody is currently becomes a canceled voter. Lastly, the bill states that the Secretary of State shall provide instructions for clerk regarding the discontinuation of any permanent absentee voter application list maintained by the clerk who automatically sent applications to these voters. So this is directly fulfilling one of the requirements from the proposal. I'll lead off by calling up Erica Pearsman, again, who diligently worked on the language for this, and if you want to provide any additional testimony.
Thank you. So, as Senator Moss said, this bill implements a very clear mandate in the Constitution, and Promote the Vote thinks that this is just a grand new step to having the most accessible, convenient, efficient, and voter-focused election system in the country. So it's great. The concept is really straightforward. Voters will complete a single signed absentee ballot application. In fact, the Secretary of State has already put onto the application that was used for the May election a box to check to be a permanent mail ballot voter. I don't remember those were the exact words, but it said, I want to receive a ballot in advance of every future election. And all of the absentee ballot applications going forward will have that box to check. And this is really very efficient for clerks. It eliminates the need for repetitive paperwork and saves time and trouble for clerks who were mailing and then processing applications, throughout the busy weeks during Election Day. And I just want to mention, regarding absentee voting in Michigan, obviously, we have gone through a sea change. After Proposal 3 in 2018 added the right to no reason absentee voting, that was really invaluable for the 2020 election because a lot of voters in the middle of the pandemic felt a lot safer voting from home than they did going to a polling place. So we saw a huge increase in absentee voting in 2020. It went all the way up to 59% in November of 2020. However, then in November of 2022, it dropped down to 42%. So I think we don't really know where it's gonna end up. With the new option of early voting, we'll probably see absentee voting settle at some percentage in the future. We'll have to wait and see what happens in future elections. But clearly, voters like absentee voting, and this is going to remain the method of choice for a number of voters going forward. And so this permanent mail ballot list is going to mean greater convenience and a smoother process for those voters who prefer to fill out their ballots in the comfort of their living room or at their kitchen table or whatever they do. I just want to mention that permanent mail ballot voting does have an added wrinkle in Michigan because of the way our presidential primary system works. Voters have to select a presidential primary ballot, whether it's a partisan ballot or if it's available to them in their jurisdiction, a nonpartisan one. And the way the bill handles this is that voters will receive in the mail, any voter who's on this permanent mail ballot list will receive in the mail prior to the presidential primary a ballot selection form where they mark which ballot they want, and if they fail to make a selection, if they don't return that card, the clerk will be required to send them a nonpartisan ballot if one is available for that election. So I think the bill solved that issue in a way that is workable, although there are other ways that it could be done. So, we're going to see. I know that some of the clerks may testify that when they had May elections and they had that option, they got a pretty strong response from voters checking that box. So this is a great step forward for Michigan voters.
Excellent. We have a question from Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if, when it comes to allowing voters to check a box to say they want to be on the permanent mail ballot list, has there been a consideration for allowing them to specify specific elections they want to receive that versus ones they'd rather not? Because you have some people who never care to vote in primaries. They don't even care. They don't want to. You also have people who are only out of town part of the year. So they might be very much want to vote in person some of the year and only receive the absentee ballot the other times of year. So is there discussion on providing that a bit more flexibility so we're not sending out ballots to people who have no intention of using them?
We did not discuss that in the work group. I think it's already, this all has to be tracked in QVF, right? And so that the clerks will know to whom to send the ballots. And I think we could consider that, but I think the thought was that might be a bit complicated. Voters will be able to specify for my November ballot, send it here. For my presidential primary ballot, send it there. And that, because they can do that now. But I mean, we could discuss that possibility, but I think the clerks might find it a bit burdensome. I'll let them answer.
May I, Mr. Chairman? Yeah, I can appreciate that it might be a burden, but it's also a burden to send out a whole bunch of things to people who don't want them. And on top of that, I mean, we discovered, I discovered in the work that I was doing, and the clerks already knew this, I learned from them, you have a lot of people who go to vote in November and they use their August ballot. So if you're sending out August ballots to people who don't vote in the August primary, and then November comes along, now they're confused and they send you the August one. I just wonder if we aren't actually creating more work by trying to avoid work. So I would think it would be helpful to provide people the option to select the elections they wish to receive them for.
I think the clerks will be able to discuss this, because there was a little bit of discussion around that.
Sure, we're certainly happy to defer to their expertise, but I just thought it was an interesting question. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, Vice Chair Voino.
I just want to clarify, we're not sending out a ballot unless they send in the application, correct?
Correct. There must,
So we're really not sending ballots to someone who doesn't want a ballot because they've requested it already by an application, is that correct?
that is correct. The change is that instead of having to submit a separate application for a ballot before every election, there's going to be one application that says, I want to receive a ballot for all future elections. But that application must be signed, and it will be subject to verification by the clerk who receives it.
And if you only want to vote in a November election, or you only want to vote in a certain election, the process remains the same. You just submit the normal application for the absentee ballot. This is, you know that when you are filling out this form, that you are becoming a permanent absentee voter for all future elections. The process should just remain the same for somebody who wants to pick and choose which elections to vote absentee.
Correct.
All right, seeing no further questions, we'll call back up our municipal clerks. Clerk Swope and Clerk Clark.
Thank you. Thanks again for the opportunity, and once again, I think this has been pretty well covered. Except to point out the need for speed on this, as I'm sure you're well aware. This, unlike the early voting, which is only required in statewide and federal elections, this is a constitutional right that our voters have today. So we do need to get this in place. We've already had to start acting to implement this without the guiding legislation, so having the guiding legislation will definitely be a benefit. In the city of Lansing, we do have an August primary election, and on Friday, I sent an email to my voters informing them of this right. And as of a few minutes ago, we already had over 2,200 voters use the MVIC site. And I do want to take a moment and explain what MVIC is. It's the Michigan Voter Information Center. It's the Secretary of State's online site where a voter can do things like apply for an absentee ballot, change their voter registration address, and various transactions like that. And then it's electronically sent to the municipal clerk through the qualified voter file. But as I said, I've already had over 2,200 people sign up for this list, so that means that they're automatically removed from my automatic application list. I don't have to send them an application through the mail for this upcoming election. They're all set and ready to go for future elections. So this is an item that, while many of the things on proposal they all benefit the voters, but some of them cost municipalities more, and some of them, like this one, may actually, in the long run, save us some money because we will not have to mail out absentee ballot applications for people who know that they're always going to vote. So it saves us mailing it out. It saves the state now is paying the postage to return those applications, so it saves the state money on the return postage, and then it saves us potentially the processing time. So this is really of great benefit, and I appreciate you taking it up. Thank you.
I happen to be one of those jurisdictions that had a May election. I mailed out I have a little over 13,500 of my 27,000 voters are on currently the permanent application list. So they received an application. Of that 27,000, about 25,000 are active voters. And of those that received their application in May, I have over 7,100 back marked for the permanent ballot list, which is representative about 80% of those applications that I received back. Some certainly did not mark that they wanted a permanent ballot sent to them. So we will I'm looking forward to a slow phase-out of the permanent application list because we have, Michigan is famous for our snowbirds, and we will have to transition them and find a way to meet their needs efficiently and effectively.
Thank you. Additional questions? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. The list is here. Vice Chair Johnson, and then back to Senator McBroom after.
Thank you. With some of the new changes, like same-day registration, and then also the fact that Michigan, along with all the other states in the nation, really don't have a system to take people off when they move generally. I took off over 500,000 dead people, but over 500,000 people that had moved to that were left on the list because we don't have a systemic system. So, for instance, if I were to move to Florida, I surrender my driver's license, both physically and electronically, and then get a Florida license. But unfortunately, it's a clunky, old, outdated, bad system that we have. And it's not our state, it's a national problem. And that is that we have to leave people on for 2 federal elections. So we get a bloated qualified voter file. It just happens. And so if somebody's on a list, and when the Secretary of State sent out those absentee ballot requests that were pre-filled out, she was estimating 500,000, I'm estimating 800,000. Doesn't matter which one you want to pick. That's a lot of people being invited to vote. And then the definition of verify was stripped out for the signature. So as we go about making it easier for people to vote, more convenient, we also have to do something to make sure we have the security in it. So I was wondering if in any of these, in this ballot proposal that passed, what is it that we can do to make sure that we don't have people voting that shouldn't be voting, but encouraging people to vote that are qualified voters because of this national system that we should have that's like a driver's license. You should have to give up your voter registration card when you move to a different state and surrender your license, but it's simply not there. So we have to, in our state, come up with some ways to protect and make sure no one's disenfranchised by someone voting that shouldn't.
A couple of things on that. So for a voter that moves to Florida and gets the new driver's license, that is electronically processed through the qualified voter file. The Secretary of State sends a notice and puts them on the cancellation countdown. As you indicated, yes, that it does require 2 federal elections before they are actually canceled. But in the meantime, they are marked as verify and on cancellation countdown. And if that notice that's mailed to them comes back, they're actually marked as a challenged voter. So their ballot would be challenged if they attempted to vote by mail during that time without having done something else to update their address.
May I just say, the definition of verify that's been there for years and years was changed to not verify. The heading is verify, but then it's don't verify. By virtue that you got it, you accept it. That is a good ballot. Now, I had friends that are clerks that didn't abide by that change and did find people that were trying to vote in 2 states. Okay. And we did have over 1,000 people vote that had surrendered their driver's license to another state. I mean, we're missing places that the water can fall out of the sieve pretty easily, and I think as we implement things that make it easier to vote, we have to make sure we get things in there that also make people feel secure in knowing that there aren't these leaks, so to speak.
Well, specific to this bill and this issue, both the constitutional language as well as this bill very clearly specify that if the clerk has any evidence that you are not at that address, which does include return mail or a surrendered license, you are automatically removed from the permanent mail ballot voter list. And you would have to reactivate your voter status in order to get back on that list.
Is that after 2 federal elections for 5 years?
You're immediately removed from this list.
If there's evidence that's presented.
With evidence, correct.
And
that could be immediate.
and what evidence would that, what kind of evidence would that be?
It could include return mail, would I believe it would include a surrendered driver's license, anything that would put you on that verify status. So any evidence that you don't live at the address at which you're registered.
Thank you very much.
Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering if you could detail how the ballots that are sent out to someone who's put in for being on a permanent receipt list. So yes, there was an application, but it was just one application. It might be 10 years ago. How are you recording what ballot is sent out to them specifically? So I'm on the list. You go through, you send out the ballots on a given day. I'm number 100. You want to make sure that when I send mine back in, it's number 100. Is it the same as it is right now, or is this going to change that?
To my knowledge, there's nothing about that process that is being changed. So I can only issue one ballot to you as a voter. So, for example, if you mark the box that you want to be a permanent ballot, and we mail that ballot, and it doesn't arrive because you did leave for Florida and never thought to say, I need to change that. There's a process now that you have to attest in writing that you did not receive the ballot. And in order to issue you a second ballot, we first have to void the first ballot. The system is very strong. I cannot issue 2 active ballots to any voter.
And hopefully the system will be set up so that it can streamline some of our workload rather than physically processing every permanent mail ballot voter. That's not there yet, but it's a logical step for qualified voter file. But the qualified voter file will definitely be used to track each ballot number for each individual voter so that we will know that which ballot they were issued and be able to, on election, when we're processing the absentee ballots, compare that to which ballot was returned, in addition to the signature comparison. So even though you've only signed the application and it may have been in 2023 and now it's 2033, we will still have your signature on the qualified voter file, and we will still be comparing the signature on the outside of the return ballot envelope to that signature on file.
May I?
Yes. And if you can be succinct and wrap it up, I just want to keep moving.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that some areas, some clerks, actually recorded which ballot number was sent out to a person on the application itself. And so is that?
It does.
Okay, so that's no longer going to happen.
No.
Correct, but it would still be in the qualified voter file.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. Seeing no other questions, does our county clerk want to come up and add information? If you'd like, yeah, come on up. If you'd like.
Very briefly, because this is primarily the responsibility of our local clerk, but the provision that is essential in this for county clerks is the language around the presidential primary designation, because the county's responsibility is to order the ballots, and so we need an idea of how many Democrat, Republican, or nonpartisan ballots we have to order, and so we would be, or as the county clerk in Saginaw, I'd be very supportive of maintaining that language and also having this done as quickly as possible so we can educate voters.
Perfect. All right. Secretary of State, Aaron Shore, Legislative Director.
Just quickly, I'll note, as we've gotten to, that this is one type of option for voters. It's for voters that want to vote absentee in all elections. There's nothing in this bill that would preclude clerks from maintaining other types of lists if people are in person for a certain election and not. And as we've established, voters would have every reason to make sure they give accurate information to their clerks, because it will become a bit of a hassle and cumbersome for them to have to go through that process of attesting to not voting and all of that every time if they are getting ballots through the mail and then not voting that way and trying to go and vote in person. So I think there are important safeguards in the system. This just removes that step of having to go through the application every time for voters that want to submit an absent voter ballot.
Yeah, Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just thought of this, and perhaps the question would have been more appropriate to the municipal clerks, but Aaron's here now. Sorry. we're making a lot of changes here at once, and I really believe that the early voting opportunity is going to turn a lot of people away from using the absentee ballot. It's going to be more convenient for many people. And so I'm a little concerned that we're going to have a whole bunch of people who just very easily right now, they check the box and are like, sure, send me a ballot every time. But then once they get into the habit of early voting, how are we going to stop wasting our postage and time and resources on sending out these absentee ballots automatically to people? I'd like for us to think about something in these bills that if a person has been receiving absentee ballots but not using them on a regular basis, that we have a way of reaching out to them and saying, would you like to discontinue being on the permanent list for the foreseeable future? And you can always get back on, but I'd like for us to consider that.
I think that makes sense. There are some provisions in the bill, but we can certainly look at that. My clerk emailed me to ask if I have a plan for voting in August already, but I'm waiting to see what my options are, so.
Points are well taken. Points are well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We will roll through to the next two bills. Senate Bills 370 and 371, dealing with the prepaid postage and signature curing. These are both sponsored by Senator Santana, so I'll kick it right over to you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I will defer all questions to the experts, so I'm just going to make some brief comments. Today, I'm here to address a crucial effects that are very important to our democracy and our system as well. The importance of access to voting for all. Our democracy thrives on when every eligible citizen can participate in the electoral process and have their voices heard. However, we must acknowledge that certain barriers include the ones that cause some individuals from exercising a fundamental right. One such barrier is the requirement of paying postage on absentee ballots. That's why people of Michigan spoke out loud and clear when Prop 2 of 2022 was passed. The voting process is the cornerstone of our democracy and should be as inclusive as possible. Yet the financial burdens of purchasing stamps is an issue for some parts of our state that has proven to be an obstacle for many citizens. This is an inequality not only that undermines the principle equal representation, but also perpetuates the disparities in voters' turnout. 19 states, along with our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., have recognized the importance of removing this barrier by providing prepaid postage for absentee ballots. This is a significant step that enables citizens, regardless of their social economic status, to exercise their right to vote with the ease without the unnecessary burdens. Senate Bill 371 also creates a standard for signatures matching and outlines the cure process for any missing mismatched signatures on absentee ballots and applications. The signature standard provides an equal treatment for all voters and prevents the rejection of valid signatures due to minor variations, and the cure process creates a way for voters to correct the missing and mismatched signatures in a timely manner, and enhancing accuracy in the mail-in ballots and helping to ensure that all voters are accounted for. All votes are accounted for, excuse me. This action sends a clear message that every vote counts, every voice matters. It demonstrates our commitment to upholding the principles upon which Michigan residents voted in support of a government for the people, by the people as well. Furthermore, the prepaid postage on absentee ballots helps to reduce the disparities in voting rates among different communities. Historically marginalized groups such as low-income individuals, the elderly, and those who are living in remote areas are more likely to face difficulties in accessing polling stations. By removing the financial barriers, we bridge the gap to empower the citizens to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So today, Michigan is leveling the playing field and strengthening the foundation for our democracy. Every voice deserves to be heard, and every voice counts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. We will bring up Erica Pearsman, and if you want, we'll have technical questions. We'll save them for our work group members. Do you want to wait till she testifies, or do you have a question on the front end? All right, perfect. Yes.
Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. So I think Senator Santana did a great job of summarizing what's in the bill. I just want to point out that a lot of what's in this bill derives from language in the Constitution that says that voters whose ballot or application is rejected because of a missing signature or a mismatched signature, the signature didn't match what's on file, have, and I'm quoting from the Constitution here, a right to be notified immediately and afforded due process, including an equitable opportunity to correct the issue with the signature. That's what was in the proposal. That's what the voters voted for. So a lot of what is in this bill creates the system that affords due process and affords an equitable opportunity to cure for every voter. Because as we have seen, there are often there are a number of voters who forget to sign their ballot or their application, which I think, the clerks will tell you is just, heartbreaking when they see that. But also, people's signatures change over time. People sign things hurriedly. There are all sorts of reasons why a signature might not match, and, there is a process in this bill. I'd also like to point out that, in addition to the financial barriers sometimes that exist for getting stamps, a lot of people these days simply do not use the stamps. I mean, I've had people say to me, where do you get a stamp? So I think this is just something, the prepaid postage part of it is something that is just going to make it so much more accessible for voters who choose to vote by mail. So what the clerks are going to have to do when they receive applications and ballots is promptly review the signatures within specified deadlines and reject a signature if it differs in significant and obvious respects from the voter's signature on file. And as I said, this kind of standard is going to prevent the rejection of valid signatures that may occur over time because of issues with health, age, or just the use of different writing instruments. And we're going to have a clear and objective standard across all ballots, ensuring equal treatment for all voters. And then the cure process for if the voter's signature is missing or can't be matched, they're going to need to be notified, including by text message and email. And a lot of our voters do provide phone numbers and email addresses to the clerks, and I think many of the clerks encourage this for this exact purpose, so that they can get a hold of them quickly and efficiently when there's a problem that needs to be corrected. And, again, this will ensure that voters who have a minor correctable issue are not prevented from having their ballot counted.
Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two quick questions. One, is it possible to do this postage thing by guaranteeing postage and then paying for it afterwards when we know how many have come in, rather than putting stamps on everything and then the ones that don't come back are just money down the drain?
I believe that is the system that will be used. I don't know the details of the technicalities. Perhaps Aaron does, but it's not putting a stamp on every envelope. It's a business reply permit, I think.
And so we get billed after, and
I believe so, but
A lot of nods, heading, heads nodding.
that's excellent. Appreciate that.
yeah, and actually the reason that the process has been started, but every single jurisdiction, every single municipality has to have its own permit. So the Secretary of State, the Bureau of Elections is currently in the process of getting that permit for every single municipality.
I'll just add a little more comments to that. The U.S. Postal Service actually would like to see, that stamp on there, a business stamp, so that way they can prioritize the election mail during that process. So that's why that rationale is there.
Okay, may I ask another question?
Sure.
And this is maybe not so much a question, but another suggestion. I have observed and studied Colorado and their elections, and they have the ability to look back at people's signatures that have been utilized at Secretary of State, either in previous elections or in other transactions, dating back 10 years. And then when they review people's signatures there, they're able to quickly look back and see, and you can look at 10-year history of signatures and see how they've evolved over time and see whether or not, and they have individuals who are reviewing those, and then they have a team to review them, and they have a 4-group team if they're in question. And it's a very robust system for reviewing signatures, and I'm wondering if, maybe that's a question more for Aaron, but if we can move to a system where there's that ability to see these signatures over time, that really can help in reviewing them to analyze whether or not that's the true signature of the person or not.
Yes, that's exactly what we want to have. I don't know exactly Colorado's, but the bill language makes it clear that you don't have to have just a signature on file. It's all signatures that have been, that are available. And I think there will have to be some instructions given, guidelines for how those various signatures are supposed to be looked at. But that is the direction that we are moving in.
Okay, thank you.
Great. No other questions. We'll keep going and call up our municipal clerks.
I'm just going to do a couple clarifying things and then address Senator McBroom's question. The great thing that's happening now is when we, as a clerk or clerk staff, reject a signature, it allows us to do that in QVF, and it automatically generates a letter that we send to the voter if we can USPS it, or if we have a email, we scan it and email it to them where they can cure that signature immediately and scan and email it back to us. So we're on the road to helping cure signature issues. I had a young man come in today who was sent an application for our May election, and I rejected his signature because there were just too many differences. And we sent him the letter. He never got a ballot because we rejected the application signature. And he came in with his letter today. He was a PhD student and said, I had other things that were more important than this one single issue election. So my apologies for not coming sooner. But he has, as many of our younger voters, their signature on file in QVF is the signature they put on at 16, 15 years of age when they got their driver's license, which is very different now. The qualified voter file allows us, as we did today, scan his new signature and add it as a second reference point when we go to verify. So future elections, we will be able to look at his new signature. And the Secretary of State has really started improving the number and frequency of downloads when there's a point of contact with the Secretary of State's office. And a new signature is available, that they are being downloaded so that we have that. And then we always have the original signature from our paper MasterCard file. So we do have it, yes, it takes a little more work. Would it be easy if we could push a button and it was all in front of us? That's yet to come, but we do have a lot of options now, and I want everyone to be comfortable with the fact that we do exercise a lot of judgment in signature curing now. It always can improve. So I don't know if anyone has other.
And I don't have anything to add, so questions.
We'll go to Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clerk Clark, as a follow-up, just to clarify, if the QVF is used instead of an e-poll book, do you know if there would still be capability to use a scanner to swipe someone's driver's license or state ID?
Yes, we do it right now in the office. When we have a voter at the window, we scan their driver's license into QVF. So it does the very same thing, yes.
Do all the clerks do that?
That I can't answer. They all have the ability, and everybody has provided to them, the secretary has provided scan bars, so everyone has the opportunity.
I can tell you in my office, there's also a regular barcode, not the scan. So we use barcode readers as well, right on the
Yes.
driver's license, and that works as well.
Okay, and then I was wondering how, or if it's needed to plug one of these holes. I always call them holes in the dam. If they're small, you still want to plug them because they get big if you don't. So it says on page 9, line 16, an elector may request delivery of the elector's absentee ballot, voter ballot, to an address that is not the elector's registration. So
Correct.
if you register in one town, you can actually have it sent to a different town. And then when you add that somebody can register using their signature, and then someone can request a ballot using their signature, they will match. And by the way, there's a lot of communities that they're so short on staff, they don't really, aren't able to look at the signatures. And sometimes somebody hurts their hand, has a stroke, has carpal tunnel or whatever. It's a very rare, and I applaud you for checking it and looking into it. Some clerks just purely don't have the resources. And then the Secretary of State did gut the definition of verify, so I'm not sure that's happening all over the state. But my concern on this is, so if you registered to a different address, and then you ask for the ballot, it could be sent to your address. But the signatures for the clerks that do check them, do actually verify, they would match. So it seems like a hole in the system that somehow needs to be plugged.
Senator, a couple things. I want to be clear for everyone in the room that clerks sign off that they have verified the signature. So if a clerk is not doing that, it's the clerk that would be committing fraud, not the voter. So we all sign off, and we all take our job very seriously. So I think it's really important to know we have a process, and we really do. When you scan the ballot or the application in, that voter's signature comes up on the screen in front of you. And you look at it, and if there's a question, then you dig deeper into it. You look, it'll tell you if there's a second signature on file and those kind of things. So the signature verification is a very critical part of elections, be it the application or the ballot, that clerks take seriously. We really do. In regard to your question about mailing a ballot somewhere else, you cannot mail a ballot within your jurisdiction to another address unless it is a care facility or a rehab facility. You can have a post office box because some people do prefer a post office box. They feel they're safer than a mailbox on the street. And you can have it mailed for your winter address or your cottage address. If someone is having their ballot mailed to another jurisdiction locally, I have to honestly tell you, I don't know if it's law that we do this or if it's, but I can tell you it's our practice. We reach out to that voter to be to affirm that they have not actually moved there, and if that's the case, they need a different ballot? Or is this the temporary address because I had someone that was taking care of their mother, for example? And so there are reasons why people do it. It's not really vastly used.
And to clarify, it is current law that a ballot can be mailed to another address or to a post office box. And, we most frequently see that with folks living in Michigan who visit other states. But there are voters who, for one reason or another, and you hear lots of stories when you follow up on these things. Oh, my mail gets stolen at my house, so I have my mail go to my sister's house. This is actually just kind of a redrafting and moving of this language in the bill. It's already existing law that the ballot can be sent to another address.
Oh, I appreciate that. With same-day registration and no need for photo ID anymore, it opens up some things that sometimes some of the older laws might not be good for, but I do understand if somebody doesn't want it to go to their house for a good reason, and it may be that they are in the hospital or care home or whatever, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, we are going to continue onward. County Clerk, would you like to come up? You're good? Excellent. Secretary of State.
I think we're good unless there's any questions on the postage authorization.
All right, I think that's been answered. All right, we'll roll through. Heading up next to Senator Camilleri's Senate Bill 372, drop boxes.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. SB 372, this bill would codify the requirement for every municipality to have at least one absent voter ballot drop box that voters registered in that municipality can use to submit absent voter ballot applications and absent voter ballots. It stipulates that if a municipality has more than 15,000 registered voters, it must provide at least one drop box for every 15,000 registered voters. This bill provides guidelines to clerks for equitable distribution of the required drop boxes and requires clerks to provide drop box locations to the Secretary of State for voter information on locating drop boxes for use. It would also prescribe that the Secretary of State shall facilitate the procurement and distribution of the drop boxes required in this bill, and places the responsibility of funding the cost, delivery, and repair to the Secretary of State. This bill also specifies that it does not preclude municipalities from having more than the required amount of drop boxes, but does require that the additional drop boxes conform to those same requirements. This bill, also requires absent voter ballot drop boxes to be accessible 24 hours a day for 40 days before each election and be accessible until 8 p.m. on election day. It also removes the requirement for video monitoring of certain drop boxes. It makes video monitoring optional for municipal clerks. On that point, I know there is significant discussion around what a secure drop box looks like, and many individuals do want to see the video monitoring to be part of this discussion. Just know that this is a conversation that is ongoing as we are finding ways to balance cost and security for some municipalities. Some rural municipalities in particular don't exactly know that they can cover a cost of a 24-hour monitoring system. So that is something that we are continuing to further the advancement of conversation. Lastly, this bill retains the requirement for documenting absent voter ballot retrieval from drop boxes not located at a clerk's office or satellite office, but adds the requirement to document the retrieval of absent voter ballot applications as well. As we know, drop boxes were conveniently used by thousands of voters across the state in the last several elections. It is a way that voters feel that they can access the ballot box in a timely fashion that fits their schedule. And so as we are expanding this process for so many Michiganders everywhere, it is not only going to be more convenient, it is going to make voting as simple and secure as possible. I'm very excited to be working on this bill, and hopefully it will see us through to a solution that fits everybody's needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator McBroom, we can go to you, and then we'll come to Vice Chair Johnson. But yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess I'm just wondering if we're doing postage, then why aren't mailboxes good enough?
Because that's what's in the Constitution.
Okay. All right. Just a fair answer. I should have thought of that. And I'm wondering, are we still allowing locals to use the drop slots at their offices? That's what most of mine were doing, little town
Right.
hall.
Yes.
People put
So
them through
the difference here is that we're talking about 15,000 voters being that threshold. Most, I imagine, would utilize the drop boxes that are on location at their township or city halls. However, for those bigger communities, right?
But slots are okay into the building? It doesn't have to be a separate box?
I believe so.
Okay, and then lastly, are we removing the practice that we had in previous elections where the Board of Canvassers were involved in reviewing the construction? Because we had that in Detroit in the 2020 election, that the Board of Canvassers was involved in approving the boxes.
We are.
Sent out for repair, et cetera.
We are, and we can bring up the clerks to answer those questions.
Thank
Sorry if I'm stepping on you. Vice Chair Johnson, we can bring up the clerks if you'd like, or how about you ask your question, we'll figure out who the best person to answer it is.
Sounds fair. When I was Secretary of State, the largest voting bloc in the state of Michigan had 500,000 registered voters, and that was Detroit. And they were #1 in making sure every single one of those drop boxes had a monitor on it so people could watch. It not only gave people confidence that there was no ballot box stuffing, but it also protected the ballots that were put in those boxes. I think when we're looking at maybe half the people voting absentee, we have to make sure that we have that kind of checks and balances. It makes people feel secure. It makes them then, when they look at the results, that they know that citizens can watch from home what's going on. And I applaud Detroit for their early and complete efforts, making sure there's cameras at every single place. I think that, and you said, Senator Camilleri, it's something you'd like to continue to discuss. I think if we're going to put money someplace, making sure that those boxes are protected, the votes in them, and making sure they're not stuffed are both really important, and I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have one more comment too. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And to Senator McBroom, to your comment, I just remembered, and I wanted to bring up the story very quickly. So when you mentioned, if we're paying for postage, why do we need to have drop boxes? There are significant postal delays that we've faced when it came to staffing shortages at the federal level. And I'll just share this quick story from my grandfather, who is an absentee voter. I've mentioned over the last several elections, just drop it in the mail. You vote almost immediately when you receive the ballot. But he does not trust that it would get to the clerk even in that significant period of time. He and my grandmother like to go drive to City Hall and drop it off themselves. And I think those drop boxes would make it much more not only secure for voters, but they'll feel like they've been voting in a fashion similar to voting in person. And so I think that provides a lot more security and confidence in the system for everybody.
Mr. Chairman, I just appreciate that it's bipartisan mistrust in the system going on. Thank you.
Excellent.
Unless they're Republicans.
They are not.
Let's bring up, Erica, do you want to make additional comments on this?
Really, much of what I was going to say has already been said. But I think one of the hallmarks of our entire voting system in Michigan now, as it has been amended twice through the Constitution, is that there is a tremendous amount of choice for voters. I know how I like to vote. I don't know how you like to vote, Senator McBroom. I mean, and I don't presume to make a decision for anybody else about how they vote. People always ask me, well, which way should I vote? And I always respond, I don't care whether you vote in person, vote by mail, and now, early vote. I just want you to vote. And I think what we have is a panoply of choices so that people can decide what fits best for them and for their lives and for whatever issues that they have going on. So that was part of the genesis of this ballot proposal, was to make sure that our voters have all of these choices, many of which are available in other states, and now we've put them together to have, a very, very flexible voting system for however our voters want to vote.
Excellent. Additional comments, questions? All right, let's bring up our municipal clerks.
Thank you again. In 2020, for many, many years, the city of Lansing has had drop boxes. We have City Hall right kitty corner from here. You can see it when you walk outside. And we've had an election unit at South Washington Avenue, a former state building, as a matter of fact. And we have had drop boxes at those two locations for many, many years, and they have been very popular for our voters. In 2020, with concerns about in-person voting, we added 13 additional drop boxes. So we have a total of 15 drop boxes throughout the city that each of them are in strong use. And when we put them in, we did our best to make sure that they were distributed equally. We have them at each of our fire stations. And most voters are within, I think 90-some% of our voters are within 3 miles of a drop box. So voters have a lot of options. And we did use the security grant from the Bureau of Elections last year to, we had 4, I think, that did not at that time have video monitoring. So we have added video monitoring. So I do understand the concerns, and I appreciate this bill. Thank you for introducing. And voters love drop boxes, and we get them, some people don't like to make their decision until the very last second on election day. So each of our drop boxes, we have somebody standing out there at 8 o'clock election night, ready to say, this is the end, and collect all of those and bring them in. And
I too have video monitoring, and I used the Bureau's security grant last year to put my second camera on. As I testified, so I won't be saying anything new. I testified before. I used the Civic Life grant that we got that was available to people in 2020 to put my first camera on, a drop box. So the Secretary of State has done a very good job. They've put out RFPs to vendors. They've examined the drop boxes, physically had them delivered, examined, have made their selection, and will have a catalog, so to speak, of different kinds of drop boxes that locals can order from at the expense of the state as covered by the Constitution. And so clerks will be able to pick the drop box style that is best suited for their needs. So there will be a lot. As clerks, we don't have objections to having security cameras on the drop boxes. Our concern has been small, more rural jurisdictions, as it's the affordability of it. Who pays for it? This requires a drop box, but it does not pay for security cameras by Constitution. And so that is our concern, and that has been what we've put on the table. No clerk objects to the video. It's how does it get paid for? That's our concern. We want to make sure that small jurisdictions are not overly burdened.
And as Senator Camilleri said, this is an ongoing conversation. We're going to land this soon.
Yes, I trust you will.
Any other questions? All right. County Clerk, you'll pass on this one. Secretary of State.
just wanted to share a few more details. Mary talked about the process that we've been going through in the RFP. The financing just yesterday was in front of the Finance and Claims Committee for the State Administrative Board. They approved up to $15 million for drop boxes for our locals. This is one of the provisions in Proposal 2 that took effect immediately. So for communities that had a May election, they wouldn't be able to take advantage of the drop box process to at least have their one required box in place. But we are trying to help locals as much as we can. And I can attest that our team at the Bureau of Elections is so dedicated. We had all of the options from vendors delivered to one of our warehouse facilities. They took all of them except the very heaviest one that they couldn't move outside and attempted to damage the drop boxes as much as they could, since we know vandalism has been a potential threat. Unfortunately, none of our staff were willing to volunteer their own vehicles to drive into a drop box, but we have tested their durability as much as we could. So happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, Senator.
Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today at 2:23, the current Secretary of State said that she does support cameras on their drop boxes. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
So hopefully we can get it put into this bill.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate the cost concerns, and we know in some places, certainly those can't be internet-connected video monitoring because that's just not an option in some communities. And we raised questions about that decision because we know drop boxes are secure and all of the provisions about checking ballots do remain in place. But ultimately, we would like to see the video monitoring if we can. So we appreciate the conversation.
And I think that some will not get up in this decade. I mean, we have one township that has less than 12 people. You probably don't really need one at that location. And you probably don't have the connection either.
That's the precise point. That's the whole point of contention, is that there are smaller jurisdictions that to have this requirement is onerous. So the exact point that you made is the reason why we're having this discussion right now.
And that's very easy to solve. We did that many times, including with the electronic poll books. We did not make that one township 12 people get it. We put on a threshold a number of people. And you'll notice that when you have a number of people, then you have, you're able to do it that way, or that they have to have service. There is a way to do it in
Maybe that's one of the solution points.
Well, I think the Constitution says that every jurisdiction has to have at least one drop box.
Oh, the drop box. I'm talking about the security camera.
Yes, that could.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, Senator McMorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to state for the record that I volunteer my services for testing the drop boxes. Happy to do it.
I appreciate that. I suggested the state police might be willing to loan us a vehicle, but I don't think that request was made.
All right.
Thank you.
So we are going to move forward to the next bill. And to be honest with you, with about 40 minutes left and 2 bills left, and I do want to have those who submitted cards the opportunity to testify, I think we can just roll through even if we extend a little bit beyond 5 p.m. So there may not be a need to meet tomorrow. See, everyone's excited. If you can commit to staying a little bit after 5, if so necessary, we will cancel our 8:30 tomorrow. So let's roll right into 373, Senator Chang.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for working together on this legislation and especially on this whole package to implement Proposal 2 and help continue to expand access to our democracy. Senate Bill 373, I'm very excited about. It will make adjustments to our law regarding photo ID. So in Proposal 2 of last year, it included the following language. The right, once registered, to prove their identity when voting in person or applying for an absent voter ballot in person by 1, presenting their photo identification, including photo identification issued by a federal, state, local, or tribal government, or an educational institution, or 2, if they do not have photo identification or do not have it with them, executing an affidavit verifying their identity. A voter shall not be required to vote a provisional ballot solely because they executed an affidavit to prove their identity. So this bill would clean up the educational institution language in the current law and codify the elimination. So it basically would eliminate the current list of acceptable forms of photo ID and replace it with an educational institution definition that is expanded and inclusive and very clearly defined. It also does add language for the now required use of a photo ID card issued by a local government. And this actually does build on legislation I've introduced for several terms. Kalamazoo County, Washtenaw County, and the city of Detroit all have municipal identification cards available to their residents, and other municipalities have explored doing the same. These cards are lower cost and more convenient for residents, particularly those who don't drive, are elderly, or have a physical disability. Since they are issued by the clerk, it seems logical to allow that clerk to be able to accept them as a form of identification for voting. Also want to note that in order to register to vote, of course, that individual would go through the same process as all other voters to affirm that they meet the eligibility requirements. Also just want to reiterate that Proposal 2 really just reiterated what we currently have in law around the affidavit option, but this bill doesn't touch any of that. It simply is cleaning up the educational institution language, that definition, and adding the municipal ID and making sure that our law aligns with what voters overwhelmingly supported with Proposal 2.
Vice Chair Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question on it. I know that the prop requires that. When I was Secretary of State, we went one by one through the AN numbers, people that were here legally, and we had 3,325 non-citizens registered to vote. The vast majority of them didn't realize they weren't supposed to. It is a felony, and if they vote, they are usually deported. It's really not fair to them, and nor is it fair to our system. The federal law says that you must be a U.S. citizen to vote in federal elections. There's no compromising on it. It's period. If you have somebody at the state, like the Secretary of State, we have the ability and are linked up with Homeland Security to make sure that that person is a U.S. citizen. If not, then I changed the rules so that they would have an LT, a limited term, because we want to encourage people to come here to go to college or work in some of our different places as a global industry. But when you let a community, a city, when you let them issue cards so that people can vote, they have no access to the Homeland Security system. They have no way to know if they're a U.S. citizen, and it is purely illegal for them to vote. We had a number of people that voted that were not U.S. citizens. There was a handful that just said they didn't care, but again, the vast majority just didn't know. It's not a fair position to put them in, that they can be deported. We did try to help one person because in Indonesia, it's compulsory to vote. And we had a man from Indonesia that worked 5 years to become U.S. citizen. He had a restaurant. His kids graduated from high school. He passed the test easily, but they asked him one last question in immigration: have you voted? And he smiled and he moved his shoulders up and he said, yes, I have. Because in Indonesia, if you don't, it's against the law. But it was against the law, and they said, we're deporting you. So I think we have to be fair to those and not let them think that because they have been issued a community, a city, a township card, that they have the right to vote in federal elections. They simply don't. And you're disenfranchising a voter that is qualified. So I think that's a big hole in this system that I think maybe can be fixed somehow. But if locals are going to issue these cards, I need to know how we're going to make sure that only qualified voters then will use it to vote.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. I guess I would say a couple things. One, Proposal 2 did include language that said very clearly federal, state, local, or tribal government in terms of the photo ID provided. So our voters passed this, is in our Constitution. We are clearly implementing that. But also, when someone receives their municipal ID card, it isn't automatically registering someone to vote. Right now, it obviously isn't being used as photo ID, but we are simply saying that it should be proof of here's your photo, here's who you are. It's not, when someone is receiving one of these IDs, it's not necessarily registering that person to vote. Our Secretary of State, our clerks are very much aware of the fact that it's illegal for a non-citizen to vote, or none of what we're doing here is changing any of that. And I believe that our clerks and our Secretary of State have plenty of processes in place already to verify, to make sure that when someone is filling out that voter registration form, they actually have to check and, assert that they are a citizen. And we clearly have dedicated election officials who very much understand that that is the law, and will continue to enforce it.
That's a good point. However, they have no system to check, zero. And they will not allow any other groups to be able to access that information. So you're going purely by what they tell you. There is no system for a local clerk to know if I'm a U.S. citizen if I ask to register to vote. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't follow the Constitution. I'm just saying this is one of those holes in the dam that need to be filled for both the people that don't know better, which we had 3,325 that didn't know better, and we had people that voted too.
My understanding from conversation, it actually may have been when you, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I can't remember if it was when you were the Secretary of State or under the current Secretary of State, but that the number of non-citizens accidentally voting is very, very, very small. And of course, they are prosecuted. There are lots of groups who will, I'm sure, do lots of voter education and education of the public to make sure that folks, again, know the law. But again, I believe that our election officials have lots of expertise, lots of knowledge, and fully know that they need to implement the law and execute the law and know that non-citizens are not eligible to vote.
When I became Secretary of State, the law didn't require people to keep that data, so we weren't able to look at only but a couple clerks, so it made the numbers way lower than what they were. And I did turn in hundreds to the Attorney General that did vote, and only did I have the ones that had the AN number. So I just think you don't want to leave holes in this. There's got to be some way so that the local clerks don't issue it for voting, or that the workers don't think it's for voting. For identification for other things, I understand, but somehow, just because it has happened in the past, and how many I can never tell you, because over 95% of the information was already gone, destroyed, and people simply don't know. But I can talk to you later about it and see if we can come up with something.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Senator McMorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to ask the bill sponsor a clarifying question, because the idea of municipal IDs and expanding who can have access to affordable IDs seems like a good step forward. It is the municipality issuing simply a photo ID identifying the resident. It is not registering them to vote, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So again, Kalamazoo, Washtenaw, City of Detroit, it's simply, here's your picture, here's who you are, here's your address. There's no voter registration involved in the municipal ID at all.
Thank you.
I think we should lead with our election administrators on this. I don't know if the local clerks or Secretary of State or county want to take the first bat at this. Chris, you look the most excited.
Thank you. Knowing what form of ID is acceptable is sometimes confusing to our election workers, and the simplification that's provided in the Constitution to add local ID, which, if I understand it correctly, would also include county-issued ID, which county-issued IDs do include CPL licenses. I think this expansion makes sense just to simplify things for our election workers. And again, this is not registering people to vote. When people register to vote, they sign a statement saying that they are a U.S. citizen. And then every election, if they show up in person, they're also signing a statement that says, I am a U.S. citizen. So I understand there may be confusion, and I do appreciate that, and I'm not doubting, I'm agreeing that it can happen and has happened. But again, the voter is signing an affirmative statement of their citizenship with or without the photo ID.
Okay, thank you very much. Does the county want to weigh in?
Just to affirm that as the Saginaw County Clerk, we're very excited because we do issue the CPL, so we have a number of individuals who get upset when they go to their polling location and they have an ID that was issued by their government, but it's not acceptable. And as you know, our IDs are only used for photo identification purposes, so it fulfills that. The second point, anytime somebody comes in, the way I explain to people who question how our election day works is that you come in, you show your ID, you don't just suddenly get a ballot. You still have to be identified in our qualified voter system as somebody who is eligible and registered to vote in our community before you're issued a ballot. So it's not like you just show a picture and a ballot is handed to you. You still have to be in the system. That's it.
Secretary of State's office.
I'll just add, to the extent that there's any confusion from residents who might somehow get registered to vote against their will, or even as they're coming across that question. This is one of the reasons that our department has worked hard, and I know many of our local communities have worked hard also to provide information to residents in their native language where possible, and we're always happy to do more on that front because we know Michigan is, again, a diverse and welcoming state.
Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. More so to the previous speaker's statement, though. I mean, part of, I think, why there is this sincere concern is that we now have same-day registration as well. So while you can say, hey, I got a photo ID, and then the system says, well, you're not registered, we also allow them to then get registered. And so, I mean, it is, I think, to the Vice Chair's point, I mean, there is a vulnerability here to people who don't understand, whether it's a language issue, a culture issue, whatever it is, and it's a vulnerability in the system. It's difficult to tighten up, but if we can find a way to do it, I think we should.
Senator Vice Chair Voino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. If the voter does not have a photo ID, will the affidavit still be utilized at the polling location?
It will. That language is in the Constitution.
Okay, thank you. And then Erica, did you want to come up and make additional comments from Promote the Vote?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out one thing about the language of the bill that wasn't mentioned by anyone else. The definition of educational institution now includes non-college options. And I think we need to recognize that not every student in our state is going to college. So there is language in the bill that authorizes, that includes any educational body that is authorized by law or an accrediting body to grant or issue a diploma, degree, certificate, or license, or grant approval to practice a profession or engage in an enterprise. And it explicitly includes extension courses and secretarial, technical, and vocational schools. I think that's a great addition to our law to make it very clear that all students, not just college students or community college students, can use their student ID as election ID for election purposes. But I also want to point out, because this discussion was getting a little off track, I think, in terms of what is the purpose of a photo ID. What the election inspectors are supposed to do when somebody presents a photo ID is to see whether the picture on the photo ID matches the person who is standing in front of you. It's not supposed to prove anything else, certainly not citizenship. That is not the purpose of ID for election purposes. And I know that many clerks go to great lengths to make sure that their poll workers, their election inspectors, understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing with photo ID. People do not need to prove their citizenship when they come into a polling place. That is just simply not part of our law. And people do not have to prove their citizenship in terms of presenting any sort of documentation or otherwise when they register to vote. As one of the clerks mentioned, the registration application says, I certify that I am a citizen of the United States, and that's what we use for confirming citizenship. I understand that there needs to be education. There needs to be a lot of education. I mean, the introduction of early voting into our options of voting means that there will need to be a great deal of voter education this year and in subsequent years so that people understand all of the options. And I would certainly like to see more education about, non-citizens not being able to vote. And I certainly don't think that we should be designing our election system to account for the possibility of bad actors doing things that are already a felony in Michigan. We just can't design our whole system, especially given the fact that people have been scrutinizing our election system very, very closely in the last few years. And we do not have any evidence of in-person voter fraud. We simply don't have it. So I don't think we need to be, of course we need to prosecute people who violate the law, and we do, and we find them. There have been cases of voters who have signed an absentee ballot for another person. Those people are caught and they are prosecuted. But we don't need to design the system for finding people who are doing something that hasn't been happening.
You're bringing up a very important point. I would imagine that most of us use our driver's license as our form of ID, but a non-citizen in this state can obtain a driver's license. I am the person who attests that I am a citizen with that photo ID. So the same would apply to a municipal ID, a county-issued ID. The ID that you utilize right now is not a verification of citizenship.
No, the only ID that is a verification of citizenship is a U.S. passport.
Exactly right, yeah. Yes, Senator McBroom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to provide some clarity here that I don't think that my colleague was insinuating that any of this was about going after people. It was about the fact that there are people out there who are making a mistake. And that mistake is, one, disenfranchising other people who are allowed to vote, and it's also putting them in legal jeopardy themselves that they didn't even want to be in. I didn't hear anything from my colleague talk about going after people or doing this to crack down, but she also provided real-life examples of this happening, and it's not conjecture or something else. So I want to push back a little bit on the insinuation that's, one, that we were inferring something is happening that's not when we have proof that it is, and two, that there was any sort of allegation here of wanting to go after people when it was a motivation of trying to help people not make the mistake in the first place.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was referring to other comments that had been made during this hearing about, the possibility of people, for example, voting twice when they are not, which is a felony in Michigan, and I'm sure in almost every other state.
Vice Chair Johnson.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify a couple things, too. We have 131 branch offices. We have 83 county clerks. You can go to any one of those branch offices, and if you are indigent, you can get free ID. And yes, we check every single one with the federal government to make sure you are a U.S. citizen before you get issued a state ID or a driver's license, except for if you can show that you're here from another country with your passport, and LT goes on there for limited term, which lets the local clerks know. Do not let them register and do not let them vote. So driver's licenses are proof that you are a U.S. citizen unless it has an LT on it in red letters. So that's why the vast majority of people use a driver's license or state ID, because you need it to do just about anything. So it's easy and it's fast. And Senator McBroom is correct. People are making mistakes. I found 3,325 non-citizens registered. It is a felony. We need to make sure that doesn't happen to them or to our system. So there's facts that show that. Driver's licenses are proof, and I think it's very important that we keep that in mind. And if we're just asking somebody to sign something, we had hundreds of people vote, and they shouldn't have. So if we can do something to be sure without inhibiting their ability to vote, it would be in everybody's best interest.
All right. Seeing no further comments, we're rolling into our last bill, which is Senate Bill 374, which I sponsored. This is a bill that assists with the implementation of early voting as requested by the clerks, and I'll call up the clerks first, that would increase the number of active registered voters in a single election precinct from 2,999 to 5,000 active registered voters that are divided into 2 or more election precincts. This is to alleviate a lot of the stressors, burdens on election administration officials. I think we're going to figure out very soon who will be choosing early voting, what kind of percentage of the voting population will choose early voting, will choose on-site voting on election day, will choose absentee voting. And as I mentioned before, the tabulators for early voting are not going to be the tabulators used on election day. So it also allows for that equipment to be utilized in a cost-saving way. So I will call up the municipal clerks first to testify to this, and we can open it up for others for questions and bring up more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill near and dear to my heart. So I want to start by saying it's optional, and no clerk, which the vast majority of clerks in the state of Michigan are elected, because the vast majority of clerks in the state of Michigan are township clerks. And none of us are going to commit political suicide by creating long, long lines. So with that said, I'll explain to you why we're so supportive of this bill. I'll use an area of Delta Township for an example. I have 3 precincts, possibly 4, that are what I consider landlocked. They're older. There's no room for expansion. The voters that are there are pretty much the voters that are there. The numbers will adjust mildly with someone moving or relocating, but there is no expansion there. I know what percentage of those precincts are on my permanent absentee voter list and what percentage of those jurisdictions historically continually vote by absentee ballot. This bill would allow me to consolidate just 2 of my 16, or 4, well, I'd go from 16 to 14, and be able to free up the required tabulator and the ADA machines that are required by federal law in every voting precinct, which are required in each of the early voting centers. I personally don't need them because I have extra machines, but it will allow me to give them to my county clerk for distribution for other early voting centers within our county instead of the state spending money or local jurisdiction, because that's still out for debate, who's going to be paying for the machines. And machines that are on we have 4.5 years left of a 10-year probable life cycle, and that we would not be buying thousands of dollars of new machines. They're paid for with HAVA dollars, with the Help America Vote Act dollars. They're not mine. They're the property of the citizens of the state of Michigan, and I can give those machines to someone else, and I have a long-term cost savings because I won't be running that precinct and staffing it on election day also for a while. And it's optional. It's not something that's mandatory, and people will be judicious. Please trust your clerk that we will be judicious.
And I think Mary said it very well. The only thing I would add is the timeliness of this. With Proposal 3, the requirement that we have early voting sites in the Proposal 2, thank you. Proposal 2, the requirement that in the February presidential primary, we will have early voting sites. And we have to get the authorization, and then we have to come up with a plan of how this works on a map and how to do this consolidation and achieve this savings in terms of election equipment. So the quicker this one can be done, the quicker we can get planning and be ready. Because we do have to, any voter whose precinct number changes or voting location changes, we do have to provide them notice, and we have to work with the Secretary of State to get that data into the qualified voter file and get that updated.
All right. Vice Chair Johnson.
Yes, I have a question, and it's going backwards a little bit.
That's okay.
I've been thinking about when the locals issue their cards for people so they can identify who they are.
Voter information cards? Mm-hmm.
ID cards that would have a photo on it.
Oh.
Okay, so what I wanted to know is, when those are issued, what kind of documents are asked for the person to show they are who they say they are, and show some kind of identification so that you can be assured that they are who they say they are?
I'm afraid I can't answer that because Lansing does not have a local ID. I think someone mentioned Kalamazoo, Washtenaw, and City of Detroit. So I do not have that information about that because we don't do that.
Sorry, can't help you on that one.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm probably asking the wrong people, and I'm sorry for that.
That's
But
okay.
I was just thinking, like,
I will
what
try.
card do you have to show? Because it's the Secretary of State's office and the branch office, everything, that's why you have to wait so long for your driver's license. Everything runs through Homeland Security. They check and make sure you are a citizen, make sure you're not a Homeland Security risk. They do a very thorough background check and do a good job of it. So I'm just wondering what exact information they're asking for so that those people are who they say they are, and there's a way to find them if there's any issues.
I will try to find out information from at least one of those three.
That'd be great.
And email it to you, Senator.
Senator Ching might have additional commentary on that.
Oh, yeah, so I found, just did a quick Google, and Washtenaw County, on their ID application, there's a couple different sections of documents that can be provided. So there's Section A, which is identity credential with photograph. Could be a U.S. or foreign passport. Could be a U.S. or foreign driver's license. Could be a U.S. state ID card, consular, foreign military or U.S. military, a visa, a tribal ID card, elector ID card. There's a whole long list of things. And then there's another section of other identity criteria. And you basically, they have a whole point system. You've got to have multiple pieces of identity documents that can then add up to, I think, over 300 points. I'm happy to share this with you. I'm not sure if this is the exact same as what is in Detroit and Kalamazoo, but it's pretty lengthy and pretty substantive in terms of, multiple documents to prove, both your visual as well as the fact that you live in this specific county, et cetera. So happy to provide copies of all of these things at the next hearing.
Thank you. So the only thing that's still my concern is that those would not be allowed to be used for people to register or vote, because you can use a foreign driver's license to get it.
That's correct, but as was mentioned by earlier testifiers, is that a word, testifiers? That the purpose of photo ID isn't to register to vote, it is for purposes of once you are there at the polling location to prove you are who you are, and then they can look you up in the system to make sure that you are registered to vote. And in order to be registered to vote, you do have to be a citizen and affirm that on a document.
I want to close out the local ID conversation because it's in the Constitution, so we're going to implement it. Anything else on 374 for our municipal clerks? All right, I don't know, do county clerks have additional commentary? Secretary of State, do you have additional commentary? I know Erica Peresman and I have had lengthy conversations about this, and I welcome you to come up and give your feedback.
Thank you. Promote the Vote supports the idea, the concept of increasing precinct size at this time, but we do not support the increase to 5,000. We think it would make more sense at this time to increase only to 4,000. And the reason is, as I spoke earlier about what we have seen so far about the increase in absentee voting since the passage of Proposal 3. So we had a very high number in November of 2020, 59%, but that dropped down to 42% in November of 2022, meaning that we had almost 60% of voters going to polling places in 2022. We only have 2 federal election cycles at this point on which to base this decision, and we just don't think that it's enough. We think that it would make more sense to wait until we have more data, because we don't want to see the unintended consequence of increasing lines in polling places because of increasing the potential precinct size.
Vice Chair Johnson.
I actually agreed with you on this a while ago, but not so much now, only because I talked to so many clerks. I had one clerk that had 2 people show up, because we have some communities, we have 80 and 90% of the people that said they expected to be out of town or were 60 and over when you had to follow certain rules. And if I think I'm right, this bill allows the local clerk to decide. I live in a very small township. We have about 5,800 people, so we only need 2 precincts. In my area, people like to go watch their vote count. It's just this rural area that seems to flow that way. So we have 3 precincts right now, which we really wouldn't need unless we have close to 9,000. But I think in this bill, it allows the local clerk to make that decision. Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
That is absolutely correct, and is not a requirement.
Right. We're just suggesting that this be a data-driven decision, and that we just have incomplete data at this time. And of course, we're looking at overall data. We're looking at the overall percentage of voters who appear to be switching to absentee voting, but we just don't know where that's going to land. I think it's going to take a little while until we know sort of what the overall statewide, what the numbers are going to be.
Any additional commentary? All right. Well, let's dive into additional cards. The only other person who has requested to speak is Sherry Ritchie, representing PIME, MFE, Stand Up Michigan, and Freedom Alliance, who requests 3 to 4 minutes to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 367, and 3 minutes total to speak in opposition to Senate Bills 372, 373, and 374, and we can accommodate that.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, evening, Chairman and other committee members. Thank you for hearing the testimony today. My name is Sherry Ritchie, and I'm a born and raised Michigander. You've probably heard me say that before, and I'm here on behalf of PIME, Pure Integrity Michigan Elections. And the statements that I'm about to make are come from PIME with the support of Michigan Fair Elections, Stand Up Michigan, and you said all that, Senator Moss. So I'll move on. Before I start reading the statement, I need to say that I've learned a lot this afternoon, and we've all heard a lot of really quality commentary on all of the bills, which are in process, and I get that. So as I read through this, I might bail or change what I'm going to say, or preface or whatever, what I'm going to say. You should all have the handouts, and I'm going to start with Senate Bill 0367. And I look forward, I will say one other thing, I look forward to how these discussions are going to go, because they're complicated, they're detailed, there are a lot of things to consider. So just bear with me on the comments, because these were all written before we heard all this today. All right. The following language has been removed from prior drafts in Section 662, Section 3, when determining locations for early voting centers. A, and if the central polling location, will not result in significantly increased travel times or delays for electors in the voting process. PIME was in favor of this language and would like to see it reinstated. We don't think people should have to make longer drives to the polls to cast their vote. Also, according to a study cited in HoustonPublicMedia.org from 2020, a 1-mile increase in a drive to a polling location reduced people of color voter turnout by 19%, while only reducing white voter turnout by 5%. I don't think we even touched on this part of that bill today that I heard. I don't recall it. Furthermore, PIME does not like the idea of forcing voters to drive somewhere outside their current precinct or municipality to vote, and would ask that the legislature ensure that funding is available for municipalities who want to conduct their own early voting. We heard a lot about that today. Point 2, too much authority is being put into a partisan office, that of the Secretary of State. Both the U.S. and Michigan constitutions require that the legislature determine the time, place, and manner of the elections, and we see authority given to the Secretary of State's office in sections 720C, 720F, and 720G. You can all read that couple paragraphs, but I'll conclude this on page 2 at the top, point number 3. Evaluate technology that produces ballots on demand. PIME would like to avoid entirely the idea of ballots on demand. This is exactly what created big problems in Arizona's election in November of 2022 and disenfranchised the voters. On-demand ballots were printed and the tabulators were not accepting them, causing massive delays in the voting process and long lines at the polls. And I'd like to add personally, I have cousins that live in Maricopa County and experienced this terrible situation on Election Day. When they tried to vote in person, they waited hours and hours for their ballots to never even go through the tabulators. So it was very, very disconcerting. Furthermore, PIME sees language that would allow ballots of different types into the same tabulator. This would bring into question the results of different ballots being tabulated by the same machine, would draw criticisms for the validity of the election results, and would furthermore make any potential recount extremely difficult, as election workers would have to sort through the ballots and separate them by hand per precinct. Just more people, more time, more money. Point 4, this allows for up to 29 days of early in-person voting. And we still are going to stand by this statement. PIME does not believe in a voting season. The number of early voting days must be limited to 9. Or if you're going to add any more, add 1 more day.
I do want to clarify, we have clear, plain language in the Constitution that prevents that. It's as clear as was read earlier.
Okay, then let's make it 10 instead of 29.
We can't do that.
Why not?
Because that's what's in the Constitution. It was read earlier.
Up to 29 days. It doesn't say that.
It's what the clerk can accommodate. I know we don't have to get in the back and forth. It was read earlier.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. but I'll just finish with the last two sentences of that paragraph. Serious question must be given to adding even further tax burdens on taxpayers to cover even more days. Every day is more dollars. Stop the bleeding to taxpayers. All right, point 5. Let's see. I'm not going to cover that because we're all talking about it. Point 6, PIME sees major problems with updating the e-poll book on a daily basis, and we question why this is necessary unless you're going to make newly registered voters wait until the next day to actually vote so that it can be captured in the e-poll book, and we don't see this requirement anywhere in the bill language. Number 7, in order to protect chain of custody of each day's ballots, PIME suggests a different ballot bag for each day of early voting and not allowing the clerks to combine multiple days of early ballots into one ballot bag. That's it for that one. All right. Next submission is on the 3 bills, 372, 373, and 374. On 372, point 1, we understand that Proposal 2 calls for 1 ballot drop for each municipality and for every 15,000 voters for municipalities. We believe that providing more drop boxes than this would only add to cost to the taxpayers and may raise further concerns about voter fraud and fraudulent ballots. Ballot drop boxes should not be equipped with mailbox-style levers, and I heard that there's going to be a catalog of different drop boxes to choose from, so hopefully this will continue to be, tweaked and addressed. In fact, Mary, are you still here? There's an awesome drop box at the township, because I live there. I know Mary. She knows me. There's an awesome drop box right there, and there's a teeny tiny little slot now, and if you push your finger too hard on that, you ain't going to get your finger back out. So I like those a lot. And I think a lot of voters would like them too. We talked about the video monitoring requirement, and that's being discussed, so good on that. We are in favor of video monitoring of all drop boxes. In section number 4, point number 4, in section 761.d, why is the total number of absent voter ballot return envelopes collected from the absent voter ballot drop box struck from the requirements list of what the clerk must keep records on? This should be reinstated again to make voters confident in the process. All right, Bill 373. We oppose, well, I'm not saying that we oppose it, because we're just offering our thoughts, okay? Introducing the educational institution definition to include any accrediting institution lowers the standard for ID requirements. Again, lots of discussion going on about this, so that's fair. 72% of Michigan voters support voter ID laws, and we do quote a source here. And I think the question with these IDs, municipal IDs are just an ID. They don't automatically register anyone to vote. That's clear. I think the question comes when you're verifying citizenship. That is the big question, is verifying citizenship. And what I'm hearing today is that that cannot be done at the local level. It has to go through the Department of Homeland Security to verify citizenship. So, people lie. They can check a box and maybe not always get caught. I don't know. I've worked several elections, as Chris knows, and I'm still learning a lot about all of it. So it's a fascinating and amazing process we have in our country. All right, next page, Bill 374. And I just heard some really compelling comments about enlarging the precincts. So let me go back to our group.
You can submit a card in support for that one.
I know. Let me go back to my group, and we'll talk about that, because, again, we all have yet to see what's going to happen with many more days of in-person voting, and things are
This is a cost
fluctuating.
savings.
I heard that. I did hear that from Mary, for sure. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you all for the time, and very educational today. Appreciate what everyone is doing for all of these efforts, and it's a big elephant, isn't it?
It
That
is.
we eat one bite at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your patience for sitting through all of this.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to make sure you had your opportunity
Absolutely.
to speak.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you all again.
I will quickly read in the cards. Eric Wellsby, Detroit Disability Power, So these are the ones who do not wish to speak. Supports 367, 369, 370, 372, 373. Barbara Smith Warner National Vote at Home Institute supports 369 and 370 and submitted testimony. Michigan League of Conservation Voters submitted testimony, supports 367, 369, 370, 372, 373. Mary Pollock, American Association of University Women of Michigan, supports all of them. Stephanie Kiruz, Heritage Action, opposes 369, 370, 372. Marcus Cheatham, just representing himself, supports all of them. Joan Gustafson, Michigan Nonprofit Association, supports 367, 369, 370, 371, 372, 373. Matt Patton, Protect Democracy, supports all bills. Rachel Richards, Michigan League for Public Policy, supports up to 367 through 373. Jody Fisher, Healthy Democracy, Healthy People, supports 367 through 374, all the bills. Ben Gardner, All Voting is Local, supports 367, 369, 370, 372, 373. Angela Arolis, Next Gen America Michigan Chapter, submitted testimony, supports 368, 370, 371, 373, 374. Mike Batterby, Michigan Townships Association, supports 369, 372, and 374. Ricky Bicknell, Michigan, or Voters Not Politicians, supports 367, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. Rusty Merchant, Secure Democracy USA, supports 369, 370, 372, 373. Kelsey Rogers, Campaign Legal Center, supports 367, 369, 370, 372, and 373. Marissa Kovach, ACLU, supports 367 through 373. Brad Williams, Detroit Regional Chamber, supports all of them. Nick Acapeti, League of Conservation Voters, supports all of them. Mary Pollock, Michigan State Employee Retirees Association, supports all the bills. Olivia Luckett, Michigan Democratic Party, supports 367, 368, 369, 370, 371, 372, 373, and 374. All right. Well, you got your morning back, everybody.
Can you move session up to 8:30?
I wish I could. But got great news for you. There being no further business, the Senate Committee on Elections and Ethics is now adjourned.